Hello and welcome. I'm Bio and today I'm talking about another video game that I recently finished. A game that I had a lot of fun playing through, to be completely honest. And that was Berserk for PlayStation 2. Now, I have a lot of familiarity when it comes to Berserk. I've read the manga, I've watched all of the animes, and I've played some of the games, specifically Berserk Muso. So going into this, be real with you, didn't have massive expectations. As most people I'd like to think don't really have when it comes to anime or manga adapted video games. But I came away from this pleasantly surprised with how competent the combat is and how just a nice little game where it captures a slice of the Berserk world in playable form. So the game's full title is Berserk Millennium Falcon Seima Senki no Shou, which translated by the fan translation is Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Holy Evil War Chapter. Quite a lengthy title for a video game in my opinion, but it's understandable. The game also has a prequel, or predecessor, which was released on the Sega Dreamcast. That game was released in the West as Berserk Guts Rage. I have only played the Dreamcast game once, and that's it, and it seemed okay for what I played. If you're interested in playing the Dreamcast game, apparently the localized version, Guts Rage, is quite different in terms to how it should be translated, but there is recently come out a more faithful translation of the Japanese version of the Dreamcast game, which is Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Flowers of Oblivion Chapter. That's what it's called in Japan. So, if you're interested, you could always pick that up. Now, both of these games are developed by Yuke's. Yeah, you know, the same developer that made some of the old wrestling video games. That's what I know them for anyway. So I was quite shocked to see that they were the ones who developed this video game and how competent of a video game they had honestly developed. It's crazy, in my opinion. The game's published by Sammy Corporation, which is another surprise, really, to see Sammy being the ones that wanted to put out a Berserk video game. It's not really something I'd expect Sammy to generally do for the most part. And the game came out on the 7th of October 2004, which means that this game is technically a Halloween game. Technically. Now, I'm not going to go over the story in this video game. I'm also going to not go over what Berserk is, because at the end of the day, I don't really like spoilers. So I'm just going to say, if you really want to learn about what Berserk is as a whole, there's plenty of other sites out there. Go on the Wikipedia, go on Mal and see the synopsis or whatever. Hell, you know, why not? We can even do just that. So why don't I go on Mal and I'll give you the synopsis of what it basically says Berserk is, shall we? So, Guts, a former mercenary now known as the Black Swordsman, is out for revenge. After a tumultuous childhood, he finally finds someone he respects and believes he can trust, only to have everything fall apart when this person takes away everything important to Guts, for the purpose of fulfilling his own desires. Now marked for death, Guts becomes condemned to a fate in which he is relentlessly pursued by demonic beings. Setting out on a dreadful quest riddled with misfortune, Guts, armed with a massive sword and monstrous strength, will let nothing stop him, not even death itself, until he is finally able to take the head of the one who stripped him and his loved one of their humanity. So there you go. The manga was originally done by Kentaro Mura, but now is, I believe, being taken over by Studio Gaga because Mura has unfortunately passed away. So I'm glad that the manga is actually continuing, even though that was a heated debate. But as long as Studio Gaga has all of the story details and was given good enough direction by Murata, Mura? I'm getting confused now. Mura. Yeah, Mura. It's getting confused between One Punch Man's creator and Berserk's creator. No, not creator, but, you know, does the art for One Punch Man. So yeah, so I'm hoping that Mura did pass on. Apparently, Berserk resumed on June 24th, 2022 with Studio Gaga handling the art and Koji Mori's supervision. So yeah, so obviously Koji Mori must have been given the entire story by Mura. So there you go. So there you go. There's a synopsis of what Berserk is. And if you're wondering where this game fits in the Berserk story, it covers volumes 22 to 27. So... But besides that, I won't go any more into the story. All I will say is that if you're not familiar with Berserk at all, the story is going to make you confused. You are going to get fairly confused because it goes over a lot of things and you're kind of jumping into the story. I'm not saying at the halfway point, but pretty far in. Again, volume 22, that's pretty far in. So if you go into this without any prior knowledge of Berserk, you're going to get confused, and really... You're the only person to blame in that situation, as you really should have more prior knowledge. Now, you could argue, then, why did Yuke's adapt the Golden Age arc, which is the first arc in the story? I honestly don't know. It's a good arc, to be honest with you, so I am quite confused why, even if the Sega Dreamcast game covered the Golden Age arc, which I believe it doesn't, from what I can understand. So... At the same time, you could say, well, Ukes should have started from the beginning of the story, but you know, Ukes can do whatever they want at the end of the day. It's their video game adaptation of Berserk. And it's what Mura, and you know, Mura might have said that he wanted this. You don't know. You don't know at the end of the day. So all I would say, like I said, if you're not familiar with Berserk, the story is going to confuse you. So let's jump onto the gameplay. So you play as Guts. He wields a big sword known as the Dragon Slayer, and you basically go through stage after stage, just taking down enemies. The combat is a hell of a lot of fun. It is so good. This is the best adaptation, as far as my eye can see, of a playable version of Guts. Not even Berserk Muso could do that. Not even Berserk Muso, not even Berserk and the Band of Hawk, which is what it's called in the West, could make Guts as beautiful, not as beautiful, but as I don't know, really, really fun to play as this game does. And it really, really does. So, it's just the weight of the attacks, how Guts attacks, his movement, it's just everything is just painstakingly perfected to a point where you are playing as Guts 100% in this game, and there's no imitation. So I'll go over basically the general controls next. So the square button is basically the normal attack, you know, which can be comboed, and square is what you're probably going to be using for most of the game. Triangle is the power slash, but it can also be used for other things, which I'll get into. But generally speaking, I didn't really use the power slash too much. You can hold the triangle button to power it up and then attack, and I don't know, I just didn't really see much use of it. I occasionally used it to try and spice up the combat a little bit when I was just repeatedly pressing square, but that's all I really used it for. The X button guards, but it can also be used as counter and a reversal strike. I believe the counter is just if you press it just before the enemy attacks, and the counters can be pretty fun to watch, especially against bosses. Whereas reversal is more of if you press just after the enemy hits you. So tend to use it quite a lot. I got quite decent, at least at telling if I was when to use a reversal or counter. And guarding can be useful, especially against certain bosses. So don't just rely on the counter and reversal. You might see from the footage that the times I generally get hit most of the time is where I'm focusing on a set of enemies and there's an enemy behind me that just runs at me and just happens to get a free hit in here and there. So, but I will be honest, the health is pretty generous in this game, and you've got a way to heal yourself in between the stage using Puck's Fairy Dust, so you will die. I did die a few times playing through this game, but they're mainly in the later chapters where I died. So, The circle button is dash, which can be quite useful. You can combo that with square as well if you press the dash, circle, and square. And it can be used to basically dodge certain... I would say the dash I mainly use during bosses more than anything. So, yeah. Then we have the L1 and L2 buttons. So the L1 button is the secondary weapon menu, because Guts has all these different extra weapons he has on him. For example, he has a small mounted crossbow on his arm. He has a little mounted on his arm crossbow. He has these little kunai knives, ninja knives, whatever you want. They look like the kunais from Naruto, which he throws. He can throw at enemies, but he also has bombs he can throw at them, as well as a hand cannon. He literally has this like this cannon that shoots out, and it's just so cool. His little arsenal, and I was so surprised to see that they added these into the game as actual viable weapons, and they're really useful, and it can come in clutch at times, and it's really, really good. I found the crossbow to be... Occasionally, I'll throw it in there here and there. It can rack up the brand symbol. I'll get into that in a minute, what that is, quite quickly, because that's based on how many hits and how quick you hit, more than anything else. Kunai, not too often. I didn't really use them. The bomb is very useful. Use that quite often, and the hand cannon I used quite often as well. Very useful as wiping out a load of enemies in one shot. And the bomb can also do that too. Then you have the L2 button, which brings up the allies' spells menu. And you won't have them all to begin with. To start off with, you'll just have Puck's Fairy Dust to heal you, but you can also unlock Sepiko's. Again, I'm gonna butcher names here. Sepiko's ability, which kind of freezes time, I think, or slows it time down anyway. Can be useful during bosses mainly. I found it useful. You've got Isidora's Fire Knife, Fire Dagger, which I used occasionally. Wasn't really particularly useful. Mainly useful against groups of enemies when they're surrounding you. It's got very short range, so they got to be right on top of you for it to be useful. And then also you have Shriek's magic, which basically boosts your defenses, which is useful in bosses, I can assure you. So you've got quite a variety of how you can play, really. And that's not even me going into the other things, you know, R1, strafe and lock on. In a normal stage, when you're just fighting normal enemies, it basically allows you to use these like special attacks, like you can thrust your sword forward, use combos, and different combos than what you would normally use with a square, more precise and specific combos, because if you didn't notice from the footage, where Guts' Dragon Slayer hits the enemy is where it damages the enemy. For example, a higher level enemy, which you can chop off their arms and so on and so forth. If you manage to get the right strike at the right time, you can technically one-shot the enemy, because as long as the sword cleaves over the head, boom, the enemy's dead. So, which makes the combat in this game quite intriguing, that you can try and play and try and take down enemies in certain ways. I'm not explaining it greatly, but it's a lot of fun, the combat, and it's got a lot to it. The lock-on, on the other hand, the R1 button can be used in boss battles as a lock-on, which is really useful. Then we have the R2 button, which is the Berserk mode. Now, Berserk mode is basically like where you get a heightened sense where your strength goes up, your speed goes up, and it's just mental. Guts goes complete ape shit on the enemies, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. I always forget about this track in the OST. So in case you're wondering, the music you're hearing in the background is the game's OST. And there's just one track that just doesn't fit in, and it's the funny march track. I think it's like Puck's track, basically. Puck's doing something stupid, and this is the track that plays. But it's funny that it just catches me off guard if I ever hear it. Oh dear. So, that is basically the controls. Now, I mentioned the brand. Now, on the health bar, you might notice there's a brand or symbol, whatever you want to refer to it, appears on the health bar here and there. If you press a triangle when that appears, Guts will dash forward and do a fatality move. Or, I don't know, what would you call it? A finisher move. And obviously, you got to make sure that the enemy's in the line of that you're dashing. If you dash in just any direction after pressing triangle, Guts will just rush forward, but unless there's an enemy in that trajectory of Guts moving forward, nothing will happen. He's got to hit an enemy, and when it does hit an enemy, with the exception of a boss, it one-shots them. It takes them down in basically one hit. It's really, really useful. So that's basically the controls. So now I'm going to go over the stages and so on and so forth. So the game has 8 stages altogether, which is 6 chapters. Chapter 1 has 2 stages and Chapter 5 has 2 stages. So chapters 1 to 3 are pretty reasonable. They're easy enough to get through. Chapter 2 has some annoying, like, take on this amount of, like, basically Chapter 2 has a point where you got to take down enemy camps. It's not spoiling anything in the story, don't worry. And there's like 5 of them you got to go to. And when you get there, it's literally just defeat this amount of enemies, 150 enemies, whatever it may be. And I will be honest with you, that's probably the only thing that kind of holds this game back. And what I'm referring to is padding. Especially in the later half of the game, there is a lot of padding. This game took me 12 hours to finish, when in reality it should have taken me around about, mainly because I kept dying in chapter 5A and 5B a lot. I did die a lot in those chapters. But it took me around 12 hours because I just spent a lot of time grinding, wailing on enemies to try and build up experience to level up my skills. And I'll get to that. I'll get to that. I almost forgot about that. So you end up fighting the same enemies again and again and again a lot. Luckily, the combat is a lot of fun, but when you get to like chapters 5 and specifically chapters like 4 and 5, it starts to wear on you a little bit. Keep in mind that at this point you're already quite far into the game in terms of hours, and you just keep having to not fight the same enemies. The enemy variety in this game is pretty good, in my opinion. It's really, really good. But it's more of just the fact that you have to keep just... There's no variety in the gameplay. It's literally just fight, 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 tack, 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 tack. The best part of the game, in my opinion, is the bosses. The bosses are a lot of fun. But when you're just fighting like enemies again and again and again, it gets tiring real quickly, which is a shame, in my opinion. And that's really the only thing that holds the game back, is the padding. Now, chapters 5A and 5B are the worst chapters in the game. Specifically, 5B is the worst chapter. 5A has this like maze you got to get through, so you get to like an area and it's got a branching path. The right path is the correct path, but the left path will take you back a level, and that can be annoying. Specifically because enemies just respawn constantly. They just go again and again and again. But you can go back to a previous stage and take it on again, and there's an enemy density, and actually wipe out all of the enemies. I did go back and replay quite a few stages or chapters or whatever you want to call them, just so I could get more experience to level up my skills. And then chapter 5B has an unbelievable amount of backtracking. Way too much backtracking for my liking. For example, let's say you need to go from point A to point B, but then afterwards it will take you from point B back to point A, then to go from point A to point C, to then go from point C to point A to point A to point D, to then go from point D to point A to point A to point B. And that's basically what happened in chapter 5B. And it was really annoying, because you just constantly get overwhelmed with a lot of enemies. You can run past them, you can quite easily run past them, but they might get a free hit in here and there. But keep in mind, the health is if you're playing on easy, health is pretty reasonable, and you can heal yourself with puck. I don't like blatant padding in video games, and it was very blatant padding in my opinion. So it was one of the only things in the game that kind of turned me off, in my opinion. So it didn't have that issue with chapter 6. In chapter 6, Guts gets a new moveset as well. So for the last chapter, which is a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to play with. So just to give you also just so for your information, when you beat the game, you unlock 2 extra modes. One is the 100 animal murder mode, which I didn't play any of, but in that mode you can unlock additional weapons for Guts. They're just cosmetics, they don't play any differently. One of them is an electric guitar, which I was tempted to try to go for, but it was I had to complete level 9, which I imagine would be quite difficult. So I was like, nah, I don't know, maybe I'll come back, maybe, and try and unlock all the weapons, but maybe not. But they are literally just cosmetics, that's all they are. And then there's the boss rush mode, which you can just rush through the bosses. There's also a world of Berserk in the options, which basically goes through like information about the characters and so on and so forth. You can also watch the movies you've unlocked throughout the game. There is a lot of cutscenes in this game, a hell of a lot of cutscenes. So, just to go over back to the whole stages and so on and so forth. In the stages as well, you have Spriggans. Spriggans are these little gremlin-looking things that are yellow, but they are yellow with a hint of green, blue, or red. The green ones restore your health to full, or I think it does. I think it also does a Berserk meter as well, if I remember correctly. The blue one gives you 3,000 experience, just like that, which is nice. And the red ones level up, can basically push your skills further than the max level that you can get from the skills menu. So the max level you can get for most skills is level 3. Get the red Spriggan, can bring it to level 4, making you even stronger. I didn't find any red Spriggans through me playing the game. Any at all. I didn't even think they were in the game, to be honest, until I looked at a walkthrough. And I did do a fair amount of exploring, but I guess they're just tucked away in a little nook or cranny that I just happened to miss. Maybe it's just bad luck on my part. During the level, you'll also come across these places where you can save, and they're called camps, and in the camps you can basically use the experience you've gained from enemies to level up your skills. And these skills can be anything from better endurance. You can level up how many you can level up to add more bombs, more throwing knives. Your Berserk mode lasts longer, or more specifically, the one I liked, Guts attacks faster. That's what I liked, because of course you want Guts to attack faster. I farmed a lot just so I can get that to max level. And like I said, 12 hours. I did farm. I did do a lot of grinding in this game, whether I liked it or not. That's why I think personally a lot of the later chapters wore on me a little bit more than they would have anyone else, because I did go back and replay a lot of chapters, chapters 1, 2, 1A, 1B, 2, 3, 4, multiple times, just so I could beat all the enemies, so I could get all the experience to level up Guts the best I could. So. But basically each of the levels is just a corridor for the most part. There is open areas, but you go down a corridor, you attack enemies, beat enemies. Every now and then, it'll put you in a red circle where you have to beat all the enemies before it allows you to continue the game. And it repeats that quite a lot. Whether it be, again, enemy camps or save the villagers. It does happen quite a lot. But can get ridiculous, especially in my opinion in chapter 5, both A and B. And I'm trying to think what else is there to go talk about. The bosses, in my opinion, are the most fun. Counters you can perform on bosses are a lot of fun. They're like little cutscenes. And and it's just, the game is just really, really fun. It is really a lot of fun in my opinion. I thoroughly enjoyed playing through this game, even if I grinded more than I should have, and some of the later chapters I definitely started to see some of the padding issues come forward. But overall, I very much enjoyed playing this game. It was a hell of a lot of fun. But I will emphasize and say again that only play this game if you're a fan of Berserk. If you're not a fan of Berserk and you still want to give it a go, then I would say play through chapter 1, play around, see what the combat's like, and if you really, really like it, you can play through it, but you're going to get confused, and if you then, after beating the game, choose to read Berserk, the game's going to have spoiled a lot of stuff for you. So you got to keep that in mind. That's why I don't show any story in my gameplay. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with this game, to be completely honest with you. I really did. But now, move on to the next game. But I can't think of anything else I can really talk about. I'm just trying to think if there's anything extra that I'm forgetting. So, but no, I don't think so. I think I've covered most things that I wanted to talk about in this game. At least I think so. So I'm going to call it there. I hope you've enjoyed my video on Berserk for the PlayStation 2. Even if it's just one of those moany, ranty, casual reviews, whatever you want to refer to it as. But I've been Bio. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.